Right now, I am standing in the back of the Sotheby's auction hall in London. The air is filtered and kept at exactly 19 degrees Celsius to protect the oil paint. I am wearing a $40 thrift store suit that smells of dry cleaning fluid and cheap polyester. Julian Saint. Claire is on the stage. His teeth are $20,000 porcelain veneers that catch the light of the $15,000 track lighting system. He is holding a mahogany gavel. He is selling the Weeping Saint. Estimated price, $45 million. 2 weeks ago, Julian walked into my basement studio in Brixton. He didn't look at the paint on my hands. He looked at the $2.50 instant ramen bowl on my workbench. He said, "Silas, you have the hands of a craftsman, but I have the soul of an artist. You are a perfect printer, a biological photocopy machine, but the world doesn't want to see the printer. They want to see the hand that presses the button. By the way, if you're watching this video, please subscribe. Tell me where you're from. Are you the one painting the masterpiece, or the one signing the frame?" The year was 2017. I had $800 in my savings account and a 400-square-foot studio with a leaking pipe. Julian started the same year at the Royal Academy. Julian had the $12,000 a month studio in Mayfair paid for by his father. Julian had the $850 brushes made of Himalayan sable hair. Julian had the private invitations to the Venice Biennale. I had a $12 set of synthetic brushes from a discount store. I had a bottle of linseed oil that I bought at a garage sale for $3. I had a 5-pound bag of pigment that I ground by hand with a stone I found in a park. I spent 5 years being Julian's technical assistant. That's a polite word for a ghost. I painted the hands. I painted the light that made the critics cry. Julian would come in at the last hour, take a $400 brush, and add a single stroke of white bone. Then he would sign his name in the bottom right corner, large, aggressive. The Weeping Saint took 3,200 hours to complete. Every stroke of the oil paint was a record of my exhaustion. I used a technique from the 17th century. I mixed lead white with walnut oil. I stayed up until 4 a.m. for 6 months. The lead fumes made my hair thin and my gums bleed. This was our breakthrough. Julian told me I would finally get co-credit. He said, "This is the one that changes everything, Silas. We are a team." The day before the gallery opening, I arrived to find the studio empty. The painting was gone. Julian had filed the certificate of authenticity in his name only. When I waited for him at the service entrance, he didn't apologize. He spoke like a weather report for a Tuesday morning. He said, "Silas, don't be a stable piece of furniture. You were a tool. A tool doesn't ask for a seat at the dinner table. I've deposited £5,000 into your account as a bonus. It would be messy. Now it is 2024. The wind in London is 14 miles per hour. Julian is about to drop the gavel on $45 million. He thinks he is selling a masterpiece. He doesn't realize that in the final layer of the Weeping Saint, underneath the $8,000 gold frame, I used a specific chemical compound in the base coat. A compound that reacts to high-intensity UV flashes. The kind of flashes used by every professional art photographer in the room. The clock is ticking. The years 2018 to 2022 were a montage of lead and silence. 25 years old, I lived in a room where the walls were covered in black mold. The rent was £600 a month, and I paid it in cash. I worked as a restorer for a corrupt gallery in Peckham. I fixed the cracked varnish on forged Picassos. I learned how to make new wood look like it had been sitting in a French chateau for 200 years. Julian got the art forum cover. Julian got the penthouse in Chelsea with the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian got the $150,000 Porsche that he parked on the sidewalk because he didn't care about the fines. I got a chronic cough from the paint thinner. I got a $5 meal deal from Tesco that I ate in the dark. I got a library card that I used to study the chemical composition of 17th century pigments, if you're still listening. Tell me, have you ever been buried so deep that you started to like the dark? While Julian was drinking $2,000 bottles of Petrus with curators, I was becoming a ghost. I didn't try to get a gallery. I didn't try to prove I was the real Julian St. Clair. I built a network of invisible artisans. The men who make the frames, the women who mix the glues, the people who transport the crates. I knew the security guards at the major auction houses. I knew the janitors at the National Gallery. I knew that in the art world, the people who move the paintings see more than the people who buy them. I spent 1,800 days in that Peckham basement. I created a series of works under the name The Pale Man. I didn't use Mayfair galleries. I sold them through encrypted forums to private collectors who hated the Julian Saint. Clairs of the world. Price? £50,000. Paid in Bitcoin. I didn't buy a Porsche. I bought a mass spectrometer. I bought a high-powered UV laser. I bought a digital archive of Julian's signature. I wasn't an artist anymore. I was a forensic architect of revenge. I saw Julian in November 2023. It was at a pre-auction viewing at the Tate Modern. He didn't recognize me. I was wearing a gray janitor's. I was holding a $15 mop. Julian was standing in front of the Weeping Saint with a billionaire from Dubai. Julian was wearing a $4,000 Brioni suit. He looked at the painting and touched the varnish with his thumb. A move that would get anyone else arrested. He said to the billionaire, "It's the soul's struggle against the material." I spent nights crying over this specific shade of crimson. Most people can't handle this level of emotional honesty. He looked like a man who bought emotions because he didn't have his own. Julian looked at me. The janitor. He didn't see Silas. He saw a piece of human furniture. He said, "Make sure you clean the smudge on the glass of the secondary frame. People like you always miss the details. That's why you're holding the mop and I'm holding the gavel. That is a microaggression. It is a knife wrapped in a silk tie." Julian didn't look at the base of the painting. If he had, he would have seen the chemical signature of the person who built his soul. I stayed silent. I looked at the light sensitivity of the crimson. I knew that the emotional honesty he was talking about was exactly 24 hours away from a total digital exposure. The 2024 Sotheby's auction was the peak of the golden child's life. Julian got the $100,000 champagne reception. Julian got the Visionary of the Decade award. Julian got the headline in the Financial Times, the savior of the fine art market. I got a call from a security guard in the basement. "The cameras are in place," he said. He sent me a photo. It was the high-intensity flash rig for the international press. There were 42 photographers. Each flash would deliver 20,000 lumens. This is the golden child contrast. Julian was built on the stolen labor of a ghost. I was built on the chemical reality of a reaction. He had the aura. I had the atom. I didn't file a lawsuit. I waited for the bidding to reach its zenith. I am a restorer. I know that the higher the price, the more permanent the stain. The bidding for the Weeping Saint started at $20 million. Within 3 minutes, it hit $38 million. The room was a weather report of high pressure. Julian was beaming. He looked like a god made of silk and porcelain. "Going once at $44 million, Julian shouted. The gavel was in the air. I was in the control room. I was holding a 5-pound remote detonator. Not for the UV frequency. I hit the button. At that exact moment, the lead photographer for the New York Times fired his flash. The 20,000 lumens hit the canvas. The chemical compound I had mixed into the base coat reacted. Under the high-intensity light, the oil paint became transparent for a millisecond. And underneath the Weeping Saint, a message appeared. Written in a fluorescent pigment that was invisible to the naked eye, but burned into the camera sensors. The message covered the entire canvas. It read, "Painted by Silas Thorne, signed by a thief." The photographers stopped. They looked at their digital screens. They zoomed in. A gasp moved through the room like a cold front. Julian froze. The gavel stayed in the air. He looked at the painting. He looked at the 42 cameras now, firing in a rhythmic, blinding strobe. With every flash, the truth burned brighter. Julian didn't scream. The weather report in his eyes changed from sun to absolute zero. I walked onto the stage. I wasn't wearing a mop. I was wearing a $3,000 suit I bought with the Bitcoin from the Pale Man sales. I looked at Julian. I said, "Julian, you were right. The world didn't want to see the printer, but it turns out they really hate the man who tried to hide it." The Sotheby's auction hall did not descend into chaos. Real wealth does not scream. It simply withdraws. The billionaire from Dubai lowered his hand. The paddle, numbered 882, hit the velvet-covered table with a soft thud. The $45 million bid vanished into the air conditioning system. If you're watching this, tell me, have you ever felt the temperature of a room drop 10 degrees in 1 second? Julian was still standing on the podium. His hand was still gripping the mahogany gavel, but the porcelain veneers were no longer catching the light. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He looked like a statue made of expensive sand waiting for the wind to start blowing. The weather report for the next 10 minutes, absolute silence. The Sotheby's security director, a man named Henderson, walked onto the stage. He didn't touch Julian. He didn't need to. He just stood next to the weeping saint and spoke into a radio. "Secure the asset. We have a forensic discrepancy." The international press didn't move. The 42 photographers were still checking their digital screens. The image of the fluorescent text, painted by Silas Thorne, signed by a thief, was already on the server of the New York Times. By 8:15 p.m., it was the most shared image on the internet. Julian's father, a man who owned 3 shipping ports and a castle in Scotland, stood up. He didn't look at his son. He looked at the exit. He walked out of the hall, followed by 4 men in $6,000 suits. He didn't leave a message. He just left a void. I stood in the back near the heavy oak doors. I watched Julian's hands start to shake. The mahogany gavel fell from his fingers. It didn't break. It just sounded like a bone snapping on the hardwood floor. I looked at my $20 Casio. "The liquidation has begun," I whispered. The next 48 hours were a montage of chemicals and legal documents. The painting was moved to a high-security lab in New Bond Street. 3 forensic art historians, each charging $1,200 an hour, examined the layers. They used X-ray fluorescence. They used infrared reflectography. They found what I had buried in the base coat. I hadn't just written a message. I had woven a digital fingerprint into the texture of the lead white. Every 4.2 millimeters, there was a microscopic variation in the brushstroke, a variation that matched the pulse of my own heartbeat, recorded during the 3,200 hours of labor. It was a biological signature that no soul of an artist could ever replicate. The lead historian, a woman with gray hair and a $15,000 watch, looked at Julian. Julian was sitting in a plastic chair in the hallway. He was still wearing the Brioni suit, but the silk was wrinkled. He smelled of sweat and expensive gin. She said, "Mr. St. Clair, the science doesn't lie. The hand that moved this brush was not yours. The hand that moved this brush was working under extreme physical stress. The hand that moved this brush belongs to someone who has been poisoned by the very pigments he was using." He looked like a man reading the weather report for a hurricane he couldn't escape. He said, "He was just a tool. A tool doesn't own the house it builds." The historian didn't blink. She looked at her notes. She said, "In the art world, the tool is the hand is the creator. And you, Mr. St. Clair, are neither." The certificate of authenticity was revoked. The $12,000 a month studio in Mayfair was locked by the landlord. The Himalayan sable brushes were seized as part of a preliminary fraud investigation. The golden child was being stripped of his gold. The year 2025 was a weather report of repossession. Julian got the $150,000 Porsche towed from the Chelsea sidewalk at 6:14 a.m. Julian got the eviction notice for the penthouse with the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian got the $4.2 million lawsuit from the Dubai billionaire for intentional deception. I got a quiet apartment in a neighborhood where no one knows my name. I got a new set of brushes, handmade by a craftsman in Japan. I got the silence I had earned, if you're watching this. Subscribe, and tell me, is it better to have a name everyone knows, or a life no one can take? Julian's father cut him off on a Tuesday afternoon. The bank account that once held millions now held a balance of negative $14,200. Julian called me from a public phone. His voice sounded like it was being filtered through broken glass. The investors are going to ruin me. They want their money back. Tell them it was a collaboration. Tell them we were experimenting with postmodern ownership. I'll give you 80% of the next sale. I'll put your name on the frame in neon lights. I looked at the window of my new studio. It was a clear day. The wind was 5 miles per hour. I said, Julian, you told me I was a biological photocopy machine. You said I was a stable piece of furniture. Furniture doesn't speak. Furniture doesn't negotiate. Furniture just stays where you put it. And right now, you are in the dark. I didn't feel a sting. I didn't feel a rush. I just felt the weight of the air in the room. It was clean. It was mine. 26 years old, I lived in a basement with mold. 28 years old, I restored forged Picassos for criminals. 30 years old, I destroyed the golden child of the Royal Academy. The montage of my rise was silent. I didn't hire a PR agent. I didn't throw a $100,000 champagne reception. I didn't buy a Brioni suit. I bought a 4,000 square foot warehouse in an industrial park in Leeds. I painted the walls white. Industrial white. I hired 4 invisible artisans who had been fired by galleries for being too technical. I paid them $95,000 a year. I gave them equity in the Thorn Archive. We didn't sell to billionaires in Dubai. We sold to the people who actually loved the paint. We created a blockchain-based authentication system, a system where every brushstroke was recorded in a digital ledger, where the printer was the owner, where the ghost had a name. By the end of 2025, the Thorn Archive was worth $12 million. Not because of an aura, but because of the atom. Because every piece we sold was a record of truth. Meanwhile, Julian was trying to sell his artistic vision on a subscription site. He was selling photos of himself holding a brush. Price? He had 42 subscribers. Most of them were art students who wanted to laugh at the man who lost it all. I saw Julian one last time in December 2025. It was in a discount art supply store in East London. He didn't see me. He was standing at the bargain bin, looking at a set of synthetic brushes, the kind that cost $12, the kind I used to own in 2017. He was wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too big. His hair was thin. His gums were pale, the sign of cheap lead-based paint he was probably using to survive. He was counting coins in his palm, 12 pence, a crumpled 5-pound note. He looked at the brushes. He looked at the soul of the artist in his hands. And then he saw me. I wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform. I was wearing a $2,000 wool coat. I was holding a $450 Japanese brush. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I just stood there. Julian looked at me, and for the first time in his life he didn't see furniture. He saw a ghost that had become a man. He saw the person who had designed his life, and the person who had deleted it. He tried to say something. Silas, I'm working on a new series. It's about the texture of poverty. I looked at him like I was reading the weather report on a discarded newspaper. I said, Julian, you always were good at selling a lifestyle, but you have no life left to sell. I didn't look back. I didn't check the rearview mirror of my Volvo. I drove toward the warehouse. The wind was 10 miles per hour. Visibility? Infinite. 31 years old. The Thorn Archive did not move to a gallery. It moved to a bunker. Zurich, Switzerland. District 4, 18 meters underground. The walls are reinforced with high-density basalt fiber concrete. Thickness, 24 inches. The air filtration system is a custom-built HEPA 1.4 unit that cycles 4,200 cubic meters of air per minute. The temperature is locked at 18.5 degrees Celsius. The relative humidity is a constant 42.1%. If the sensors detect a deviation of 0.05%, a $12,000 automated nitrogen suppression system activates. I am no longer grinding pigments with a park stone. I am managing a global network of invisible artisans. If you're still listening, subscribe. Tell me, when you've dismantled your enemy, do you build a palace or a fortress? The weather report for the global art market in 2026. A total blackout. The St. Clair scandal triggered the Great Audit. The FBI art crime team in the Metropolitan Police's Art and Antiques Unit opened 412 new case files, every painting sold by a St. Beruga. Clair-affiliated gallery was now under a 10,000 watt spotlight, because if the Weeping Saint was a fraud, then the 182 other works were ghosts. I didn't watch from the sidelines. I owned the laboratory that did the testing. I recruited the Forgotten 12. The people Julian had called tools for a decade. Maria, 29, a conservator from Milan who spent 4,000 hours painting the lace on Julian's portraits. She was paid $14.50 an hour. She lived in a room that smelled of damp laundry and turpentine. Anton, 54, a master of 18th century glazing who did the light work for the Sunrise Over Thames series. Julian had paid him in cash and told him that people like him don't deserve a name on a wall. I gave them $125,000 base salaries. I gave them equity in the Thorn Protocol. The protocol was the ultimate microaggression against the elite. We didn't use certificates of authenticity signed by curators in $5,000 suits. We used a mass spectrometer. We used a 3D laser scanner with a resolution of 4.2 microns. We found the genetic fingerprint of the labor. Every brushstroke has a specific velocity and pressure. Maria's strokes had a rhythmic 0.8-second delay. Anton's glazes had a chemical signature that included a specific type of walnut oil he pressed himself. Julian's signature, the large gold one, had no depth. It was a surface-level lie. Julian's father, Lord Arthur St. Clair, tried to call me. He called from a private line in a Scottish castle that had been in his family for 300 years. He spoke with the weather report tone of an emperor who had never been told no. He said, "Silas, an institution is a long-term investment. Clair name represents the stability of the British art market. If the name fails, the market loses $800 million in value. Take a $15 million foundational grant. Sign a document saying the Weeping Saint was an authorized experiment in collective authorship. Don't be the furniture that trips the master of the house." I looked at a rusted 12 RMB shovel I kept on my desk as a souvenir. I said, "Lords, Claire, the house is already on fire, and I'm not the furniture. I'm the termite that's been eating the support beams for 7 years. Your $15 million can't buy back the lead poisoning in my blood, but it can buy a lot of putty for the holes I'm about to leave in your walls." 2026 was a montage of legal and digital erosion. Claire name was being deleted from history, 1 millimeter at a time, if you're watching this. Tell me, how long does it take for the world to treat your name like a terminal disease? March 14th. The Royal Academy removed Julian's visionary plaque. They didn't make a speech. A janitor in a gray uniform used a crowbar. The sound of the wood splintering was recorded on a cell phone and viewed 12 million times. The hole in the mahogany was filled with cheap wood putty. Color, dead bone. Price, $8.50. April 22nd, the St. Clair Audi went public. I released the chemical analysis of all 183 Julian Street Clair paintings. The data was absolute. Julian had painted exactly 0.03% of the total surface area of his career. He had added the highlights, he had added the signature. He had added the ego. I had added the soul. Maria had added the history. Anton had added the light. The FBI froze Lord St. Clair's assets. The Chelsea penthouse was seized. The $150,000 Porsche was sold at a police auction for $42,000 because it had been vandalized with the word thief in lead-white paint. Julian moved from the hostel in Elephant and Castle to a 150-square-foot room in a basement in Brixton. It was the same building I had lived in 2017. The leak in the pipe was still there. The smell of black mold was still there. The golden child was finally in the dark. I sent him a package in May. It wasn't a check. It was a Ziploc bag containing the $12 synthetic brushes I used in 2017. The note inside said, "You told me I was a printer. Here, let's see if the machine works without the hand." It was written on the back of a subpoena. His handwriting was shaky, the sign of early-stage neurological tremors from the lead fumes in the Brixton basement. He said, "Silas, the critics still love my conceptual brilliance. They say the fraud is the ultimate performance art. I am selling the rights to my life story for $2 million. I'm still the face. You're still just the paint." Huh. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had already bought the production company that was optioning his life story. I was the one who would decide if the ending was a tragedy or a farce. September 2026, the British Museum Gala. The air was thick with the scent of $400 per ounce perfume and 50-year-old single malt scotch. I was the guest of honor. I was wearing a bespoke $8,000 charcoal gray suit. The lining was made of silk from a factory in Kyoto that only produces 100 meters a year. I was drinking a glass of 1964 Macallan. Price? $2,800 per pour. Beatrice, Julian's ex-fiancée, approached me near the Elgin Marbles. She was wearing a $30,000 Alexander McQueen gown and a diamond necklace that looked like a cold collar of ice. In 2018, she had told Julian that I smelled of the lower classes and cheap turpentine. Now she touched my arm with the manicured hand. The nails were rich girl pink. "Silas," she said. Her voice was a weather report of forced warmth and desperate climbing. "We always knew Julian was too loud for someone of your depth. The family is hosting a dinner at the estate in Oxfordshire next weekend. The French ambassador will be there. The Minister of Culture will be there. We'd love for you to be the centerpiece of the evening. It's an exclusive circle, Silas. The kind of circle a man of your new status belongs in. That is the ultimate microaggression. It is an invitation into a cage where they can watch the new money dog perform." She didn't see Silas Thorne. Tadger candled the Elysium Mingwe de Cudillon Ledrondian Menman de Jaduit. I looked at her necklace. I said, "Beatrice, the dog has had enough of your table scraps. And as for the estate in Oxfordshire, you might want to check your mail tomorrow morning." The primary mortgage on that property was sold to an anonymous holding company in Zurich yesterday. That company is called the Alchemist of Ash. And the alchemist doesn't want the French ambassador for dinner. He wants the land cleared by the end of the month. The rich girl pink nails dug into my sleeve for a second, then retracted. The porcelain smile shattered. The weather report in her eyes turned to a blizzard of panic. You bought our debt?" "I didn't buy your debt, Beatrice," I said, taking a slow sip of the scotch. "I bought your history, and I'm about to shred it." 27 was the year of the Shadow Restoration. The Thorne Archive reached a valuation of $120 million. Not because of the paintings I painted, but because of the paintings I unpainted, if you're still listening. Tell me, if you could erase the most famous name in the world, would you press the button? I spent 4,000 hours in the Zurich bunker. I conducted the final audit of the 183 St. Clair works. One by one, I invited the invisible artisans to sign their work. We used a laser ablation technique to remove the gold Saint dog. Claire's signature. Underneath, we used the mass spectrometer to verify the base layers. Then we invited Maria to sign the Madonna of the Streets. We invited Anton to sign the Thames Light. We invited the 14-year-old girl in Vietnam, now 21, and a student I was sponsoring to sign the Lotus Field. The art world didn't just shift. It collapsed at the catalogs of the Louvre, the Met, and the Uffizi were updated. The name Julian Clare was replaced with Record Dealers Torn and Artisan Collective. It was a forensic execution. Julian tried to commit one final act of conceptual brilliance. He found a struggling art student in a pub in Camden. He told the student, "Paint a Silas Thorne. Paint the way he paints. Use the lead white. Use the walnut oil. I will sign it, Silas Thorne, and we will sell it as a lost work. We will prove he is just a brand, just like I was." The painting appeared at a small gallery in Paris in November 2027. The weather report for Julian's comeback. A perfect trap. Julian stood in the back of the gallery, wearing a coat from a donation bin. He waited for the experts to arrive. He waited for me to arrive. I walked in. I didn't look at the student. I looked at the specific frequency of the guitar. I had designed the Thorne protocol with a 10-year fuse. In 2017, every tube of lead-white paint I bought was salted with a rare earth isotope, a specific signature that only exists in my paint. If a painting doesn't have that isotope, it isn't a Thorne. But more importantly, every tube of paint Julian stole from me in 2017 was salted with a secondary isotope, one that reacts to ultraviolet light by turning a bright neon purple. I pulled out a small UV flashlight, the kind you buy for $15 to check for counterfeit currency. I shined it on the lost Thorne. The canvas didn't glow gold. It didn't show my name. The entire surface turned a violent, mocking shade of purple. The isotope proved that the paint was stolen. It proved that Julian was still using the parts of the machine he didn't understand. The Paris police were waiting at the exit. Julian wasn't arrested for art fraud this time. He was arrested for the theft of hazardous industrial materials, the lead pigments he had stolen from my Brixton studio a decade ago. The golden child was finally in a cage made of cold iron. 2028. I am standing on the deck of a boat on Lake Como. The water is a weather report of deep blue and absolute calm. The air is 22 degrees. The wind is 3 miles per hour. I am holding the 115-page certificate of ownership for the St. Clair family estate. I didn't turn it into a museum. I didn't turn it into a gallery. I hired a demolition crew. They didn't use a wrecking ball. They used a deconstruction protocol. Every stone was numbered. Every piece of mahogany was salvaged. We sent the materials to the 240 suppliers and artisans I had worked with. Old Wang in Kunshan got the marble for his village's new school. Maria in Milan got the silk for her studio. The house of the golden child was literally redistributed to the tools. Julian is in a prison in northern France. He uses a $5 mop. He wears a gray uniform. He has no brushes. He has no name. His father, Lord St. Clair, passed away in a state-funded care home. The institution is now a footnote in a textbook about corporate corruption. I reach into my pocket. I find the Ziploc bag with the Cooper Union scholarship letter from 2016, the one David had scribbled on. Clara is a homebody. That was a different story. I find the napkin Julian wrote on. I am starving. I don't keep it. I don't shred it. I just let the wind take it over the lake. It is a white speck against the blue water. Then it is gone. I am Silas Thorne. I have deleted the ghost. I have deleted the thief. I have deleted the furniture. I walk into the cabin of the boat. I sit at a simple pine table. I pick up a pencil. A 2B graphite pencil. Price, 50 cents. I draw a single line. It is a perfect line. It belongs to no one. And it is finally, truly silent. 36 years old. I am standing in a temperature-controlled server room in Palo Alto. The air is filtered to a Class 10 cleanroom standard. The sound is a weather report of white noise. The hum of 4,200 liquid-cooled H100 GPU clusters. The floor is made of anti-static carbon fiber tiles. Price: $240 per square foot. Alias Vance is standing in front of a 100-inch micro-LED display. His teeth are the same porcelain white as Julian's. His hoodie is made of a rare vicuña silk blend. Price: $4,200. He is holding a haptic stylus. He is launching GENESIS 0, an AI model trained on the Thorn archive. Estimated valuation of the company, $2.5 billion. 2 weeks ago, Alias invited me to his glass and steel headquarters. He didn't look at the scars on my hands from the lead poisoning in 2017. He looked at the digital noise on his monitor. He said, "Silas, you are the greatest craftsman of the analog age, but the era of the individual hand is dead. I've digitized every brushstroke of yours, every 4.2 mm variation, every pigment ratio. I've turned your soul into a... You are the fertilizer for a forest you'll never walk in. It's just the evolution of the species. By the way, if you're watching this video, subscribe. Tell me where you're from. Are you the creator or are you the data point?" The year was 2030. I had retired to the Tuscany villa with $45 million. Alias Vance started as a prompt engineer at a boutique tech firm. Alias had the $12 million seed round from his venture capitalist father. Alias had the supercomputer with 80 petabytes of storage. Alias had the ethics committee that he paid in stock options to stay quiet. I had a 500 stone house. I had a set of Japanese brushes that I kept in a cedar box. I had the knowledge that a machine can only steal what it can see. I spent 2 years watching him scrape the web for my work. I watched him buy the Weeping Saint from the museum for a digital twin project. He didn't know that I had been waiting for him. I had spent 28 poisoning the archive. Underneath the varnish of the works I restored, I had embedded adversarial patterns. Microscopic glints of light that look like noise to the human eye, but function as a virus for a neural network. I called it the Trojan pigment. The day GENESIS 0 went live, the tech press called it the end of the artist. Availables filed the patents for algorithmic authorship. He spoke like a weather report for a Monday morning in the future. He said Silas is the stable furniture of the past. GENESIS 0 is the wind. A tool doesn't complain when it's replaced by a... Now, it is 2032. Alelius is about to generate the final masterpiece for the Silicon Valley Gala. He thinks he is creating life. He doesn't realize that for 4 years I have been the ghost in his machine. And every time his AI thinks, it is actually eating the poison I left behind. The years 2030 to 2032 were a montage of code and grit. I lived in the Tuscany villa, but I spent 18 hours a day on a terminal. I wasn't painting with walnut oil. I was painting with Python scripts. I was painting with data corruption. Alelius got the Time magazine cover. Alias got the penthouse in San Francisco, with the view of the Golden Gate Bridge. Alias got the $400,000 electric hypercar that drove itself. I got a chronic headache from the blue light of the monitors. I got a $12 pizza from a local village that I ate while watching the neural weights of GENESIS 0 fluctuate. I got a digital forensics degree that I earned under a pseudonym. Tell me, have you ever built a trap inside the mind of the person who tried to replace you? While Alias was giving TED Talks about the democratization of beauty, I was building the logic of the leak. I didn't try to stop him from scraping my work. I encouraged it. I created 10,000 lost thorns and put them on the dark web. They looked perfect. They had the atmosphere. They had the lead white. But inside the pixels, I had hidden a recursive loop, a piece of code that told the AI that beauty was actually decay. Alias's machine was a golden child. It was fed only the best data. It was told. It was flawless. It was told it was the owner of the world. It didn't know that its diet was 40% digital arsenic. I saw Alias in May 2031 at a tech art summit in Basel. He didn't recognize me. I was wearing a gray tech support uniform. I was holding a $150 fiber optic tester. Alias was showing a generated thorn to the CEO of a major social media platform. The art was a landscape that looked like my Tuscany villa. Alias said, "Look at the texture." The AI has surpassed the human Silas thorn. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get lead poisoning. It just produces perfection on demand. Silas was a bottleneck. We have cleared the pipes. That is a microaggression. It is a digital knife wrapped in a fiber optic cable. Alias didn't look at the shadows in the painting. If he had, he would have seen that the shadows were moving. They were growing. Exactly 0.04% every day. A digital mold was eating his perfection from the inside. June 2032, the Silicon Valley Gala. The air in the ballroom was a weather report of high-frequency trading and synthetic scents. A Marin, just remember. Alias was the centerpiece. The ticket to the event cost $25,000. The wine was a $15,000 Cabernet served in 3D printed crystal glasses. Alias was wearing a suit made of smart fabric that changed color based on his heart rate. It was a steady, arrogant gold. He walked to the stage. "Tonight," he said, "we unveil the Eternal Saint, a work created by GEEESIS. Zero in the style of Silas Thorne. It took the AI 4 seconds to generate what took Silas 3,200 hours. This is the moment the shadow becomes the light." The 100-inch micro-LED display flared with 20,000 nits of brightness. For 10 seconds, the image was beautiful. It was a portrait of a man looking at a horizon. The brushstrokes were thorn. The light was thorn. The crowd gasped. Alias's heart rate suit turned a deep, triumphant purple. Then, the Trojan pigment activated. The recursive loop I had planted 4 years ago reached its 1 millionth cycle. The AI began to correct the image. It saw the landscape as noise. It saw the light as a mistake. On the 100-inch screen, the portrait began to melt, not like oil paint, like a digital seizure. The eyes of the saint began to leak raw code. The horizon turned into a series of jagged neon orange error messages. The Eternal Saint was becoming an eternal glitch. Alias hit the refresh button. The image flickered. It came back as a photo of the 2017 Brixton basement, the leak in the pipe, the black mold, the $2.50 instant ramen bowl. Across the image, in a font that looked like human handwriting, the words appeared, "Data is not art. The hand is not a prompt." The 20,000 nits of light began to strobe. Rhythmic, aggressive, exactly like the flashes at the 2024 set. The crowd backed away. The $15,000 Cabernet was forgotten on the tables. The collapse of GNSIS0 was a weather report of a global system failure. It didn't just ruin Alias. It ruined the ethics committee. It ruined the venture capitalists who had bet $2.5 billion on the end of the artist. It ruined the class action lawsuit from the investors. It ruined the class action lawsuit for copyright infringement and data poisoning. Alias got the permanent ban from every tech summit in the world. I got a call from the head of the Artisan Collective in Milan. I got the satisfaction of watching the digital golden child drown in his own data. The montage of the digital erasure. August. The GEN. Fuck off. ESIS. 0 servers were seized by the FTC. The liquid cooling system was shut down. The sound of the 4,200 GPU clusters dying was a long, descending groan. September. Alias's smart suit was sold at a bankruptcy auction for $140. The battery was dead. The fabric was a dull, sickly gray. October. The Thorn archive was returned to a secure offline server in Tuscany. I deleted the digital twins. I deleted the 80 petabytes of storage. I left one file, a 4.2 KB text document. It read, "The printer is off. Alias moved into a 200-square-foot studio in East Palo Alto. The air smells of stale coffee and burnt circuitry. He spent his days trying to write a book about the Great Betrayal. He tried to use an AI to write it. The AI only produced the word thorn over and over again for 400 pages. I saw Alias one last time in December 2032. It was at a repair cafe in San Jose. He didn't see me. He was standing at a workbench trying to fix a broken tablet. He was using a soldering iron that cost $12. His hands were shaking. The soul of the creator was struggling with a simple circuit board. He was wearing a hoodie with a hole in the elbow. His hair was thin. His teeth, the $20,000 veneers, were chipped. He was counting cents in his palm to pay for a piece of solder. He looked at the tablet. He looked at the machine that had failed him. And then he saw me. I wasn't wearing a tech support uniform. I was wearing a $4,000 wool coat. I was holding a 5-year-old stone from my Tuscany villa. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I just stood there. Alias looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see fertilizer. He saw the person who had designed the forest, and the person who had set it on fire. He tried to say something. Silas, the code. How did you hide it in the pixels? I looked at him like I was reading a weather report for a dead planet. I said, Alias, you told me I was a biological photocopy machine. But you forgot the first rule of copying. Every time you copy a ghost, the image gets a little darker, until finally, there is only the dark. I didn't look back. I didn't check the cloud sync on my phone. I drove toward the mountains. The wind was 12 miles per hour. Visibility, infinite. 2033. I am standing in my Tuscany villa. The wind is 2 miles per hour. The sun is hitting the 50-year-old stone at exactly 30 degrees. The Artisan Collective is now 400 people strong. We don't use GPUs. We use hands. We don't use prompts. We use silence. If you've watched all 21 parts, understand this. The world will always try to tell you that you are obsolete. They will try to tell you that the algorithm is the new god. Let them. Let them worship the screen. Because a screen can be turned off with a single switch, but a hand remains. I reach into my cedar box. I find the Japanese brushes. They are still perfect. The bristles are soft and resilient. They smell of tradition and survival. I don't paint a landscape. I don't paint a saint. I paint a single circle in the center of a blank canvas. The circle is red, the color of a rusty nail, the color of a chemical burn, the color of the sun before it sets. It is 2034. I am 38 years old. I am sitting on the terrace of the villa. The master of forgery is a name I haven't heard in years. The St. Clair scandal is a footnote. The Alelius collapse is a warning. I see a young girl in the village. She is sitting on a stone wall. She has a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper. She is drawing the horizon. She is struggling with the perspective. She is getting smudge marks on her face. She looks frustrated. She looks alive. I walk over to her. I don't give her a tablet. I don't give her a prompt. I give her a Japanese brush and a small bottle of walnut oil. Hold it like this, I say. I don't tell her my name. I don't tell her about the $120 million. I don't tell her about the Zurich bunker. I just show her how to move the light. She looks at me. She smiles. She moves the brush. The line is shaky. It is imperfect. It is beautiful. The weather report for the rest of eternity. No signal required. Visibility. I am Silas Thorne. I am no longer the ghost. I am the hand that holds the brush. And I am finally truly silent.